Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, Michael people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits, and why not? We're ushering in the beach chairs, the backyard patio furniture, the beer kegs, and barbecue as Memorial Day is here. Hope you're enjoying it wherever you may be, and wishing you the same as you get to listen to yours truly here over the next hour. Thanks for stopping by to get your fix on everything that's happening in the world of sports, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And yes, now that the season has arrived, not officially when it comes to summer, we still have to wait about another 25 days or so, but I'm sure everywhere throughout this country, and with it being Memorial Day, of course, I'd be remiss not to remember our fallen soldiers who have fought for our country, for our freedom, etc. Obviously, this is their day as we celebrate the unofficial beginning of summer. So with that being said, and speaking about, I'll say on a much lesser degree, about fallen, we may have two opponents after tonight and tomorrow night in the Indiana Pacers and the Minnesota Timberwolves will be put out to pasture for the basketball season, and will leave two teams standing to play in an NBA final, which everybody I'm sure will be ecstatic, because you'll have a ton of storylines if it does play out. We have the Boston Celtics, as we all know, best record in the sport, 64-18, and what they've done here so far in this postseason. And then the Dallas Mavericks with the backcourt dynamite duo of Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. And of course, those storylines there with Kyrie going back to Boston, although we've seen that movie before. But you have those two teams looking like they're going to battle it out for the Lawrence O'Brien Trophy, which will begin about the start of NFL training camp in late July. No, I'm kidding. Actually, it'll be the 4th of July when the NBA Finals will commence. One more time, again, I'll keep my day job and not be a comedian. But think about it. If the NBA seasons were to end tonight for Indiana and tomorrow for Minnesota, you're not going to have an NBA Final until a week from this Thursday. So you know Adam Silver, the powers that be, all the suits on Fifth Avenue there in Manhattan, they are maybe not shaking in their boots, but you know they're nibbling on their fingernails, and they have their Cabernet or Cabernet Sauvignon on ice, and knowing that they're going to spit that up if the Celtics do close out the Pacers tonight. And who knows the status of Tyrese Halliburton with his hamstring, and that's going to be a big loss and a big component as to why the Celtics will advance. And even though he did not play on Saturday night, and the team did perform well, and of course we'll break that down in a second. And then you have the flip side of that, where Minnesota, they can't seem to, in crunch time, close out these games. And it's weird because this team just a week ago were able to win a Game 6 at home by 45 against Denver, and then win in Denver in a Game 7. And now it seems as if they're either playing hot potato with the basketball, or they can't seem to stop Luka or Kyrie or any of the Dallas Mavericks for that matter, and the NBA will be off into the wilderness if by tomorrow night at around 11:30 both of these teams advance, and we're going to have to wait for an eternity for this NBA Finals to begin. And that's going to be a tough pill to swallow if you're an NBA fan. And I know if you're dyed-in-the-wool or someone like myself who's a kook and loves sports, of course you're going to have to wait it out. But for the casual sports fan, or for the one that's saying, oh, NBA Finals, did the Celtics advance? And how about Dallas, Minnesota? Oh, yeah, they swept their series. Oh, when does this series start? Does it start this coming Thursday? Does it start Sunday? Does it start Tuesday? No, it's going to start, like I said, sometime in the early part of June. And that's a shame. There isn't anything the NBA could do about that. They can't move up the schedule because everything is pretty much set. They have to look at it as if the series both went 7 games to give themselves at least a little bit of a cushion, but now they may have a cushion that they will certainly not welcome, but will have no choice but to do so. And man, that is just going to be tough sledding. And me as a fan, I hope there's some length, even with the Celtics, because if the Celtics do lose tonight, there'll be a Game 5 at least Wednesday. And I think you could look at it from this perspective. Even if the series both go 5 games, and granted that Dallas would have to get on a flight to go to Minnesota, which is the last thing they want to do, but even if you extend the series to at least Thursday, or maybe even get a 6th game where it goes into the weekend, you can live with that. 5 or even 6 days would still be rough, and you'd have to wait around forever for the NBA Finals to begin. But at least that's better than having to wait 9 days. And both teams having some rust, even though they have plenty of rest. And especially with the Celtics trying to get Kristaps Porzingis back, as I'm sure we're waiting to see what's going to happen with him. And even though a lot of the reports had him maybe playing in Game 4, but why bring him back when you're up 3-0, which I'm totally for. But here's what you're going to have here over the course of this stretch here. And this may be a bit premature, but I have to start off the podcast saying so because I talked about this over the weekend on my YouTube channel. If you haven't checked, at JAYREELZ on YouTube, I posted that even after the Celtics won Game 3 Saturday night, and thinking to myself, well, Dallas has a home game. If they win that game and they're both up 3-0, now the NBA is going to be in a conundrum. So we'll have to wait and see. So now let's get to the series. I just had to put that as a big picture item and keep those as receipts, because once we get to Thursday's podcast, and let's say if we do have sweeps already in the making, then yes, we're going to have to sit around and wait and wonder and just have an analysis by paralysis of an NBA final that is going to take forever to get here. So now let me just put the lid on that and move on. I'll start with the game last night with Dallas, since that's the more recent game. And the only thing you could say, if you're more so a Timberwolves fan than a Maverick fan, but really what it boils down to is that they've been able to come up clutch. They've been able to deliver. They've been able to rise to the occasion, as we've seen here, especially since we last spoke on Thursday. Whether it's the shot by Luka in Game 2 over Rudy Gobert, and I get it that he was on ice skates and had no shot to guard Luka as he took the step back three to win the game. And you could even fault Anthony Edwards, who has not had a good series here by any stretch. And I get it, he's may had some moments and has done some things, but he has not been consistent and is really showing a little bit of his youth. And not only that, but you have to also combine just the fantastic combination of Kyrie and Luka and what they've been able to do, not only just throughout this postseason, but even in this series, to show up Minnesota. And I'm sure Kyrie, to use the old Michael Jordan line, taking it personal, how in the previous series after Minnesota beat Denver, and how he said that I got Kyrie, meaning Anthony Edwards, and even Kyrie in the postgame on TNT, I believe it was after Game 1, I don't think it was Game 2, how he came out and said that, oh, well, he wants me, well, he's got me. And boy, has he shown the young fella a thing or two about getting this deep into a postseason at this stage and deep into the pool for the young 22-year-old. And all the comparisons to Michael Jordan, we could certainly put that on ice right now. And yes, we could see the competitive fire. We could see the will and him wanting to eviscerate his opponents. But the last thing he's been able to do in this series, forget about even trying to do that, but even win a game. And that's been the difference. The Mavericks have come up big here in crunch time, and the Timberwolves have been small. And Karl-Anthony Towns, he has just been invisible in this series. He shot terrible yesterday. Even his coaches come out and said that, yes, he's got to play better. And, of course, I'm paraphrasing. And Karl-Anthony Towns, we get it. He's a guy that can make threes, and we know what the way the game is in the NBA today. It's all about trying to get to shoot beyond the perimeter to make it a three-point contest. And even though Karl-Anthony Towns could do so, but we should go to look at the tape and go to his strengths more so than just have him just toe the perimeter and just chuck threes all day. And even to a certain extent, I've seen that with the Celtics, which we know that that's their MO, and we'll, of course, talk about them in a minute. And when you look at a guy like Al Horford, now, of course, he makes threes as well, and as we saw there the other night in Game 3, but you don't want to live and die with that mentality, especially if you're a big man. Play the low block. We understand the NBA's not played that way. I get it. But still, you'd want to see Karl-Anthony Towns more so down near the basket as opposed to away from the basket. Because, yes, he could have that night where he's hot and he gets a lot of points and he's shooting well behind the arc. But then you have what you've seen over these 3 games, and including last night, where what did he shoot? 5 for 18 and was just invisible. And I just talked about Edwards and what he's done so far here in this postseason, and none of the other guys have really stepped up. And that's what you have to really shake your head at when you think about this T-Wolf team, how they were able to jump out the way they did against Phoenix and sweeping them. But you'd figure that Phoenix, they were a team in disarray all year. They even fired the coach, Frank Vogel, afterwards. And there doesn't seem to be any chemistry on that Suns team. Okay, fine. But then the Denver series, they win the first 2 games there. They lose the middle 3 and then win the back 2 and come from behind in Game 7. And this wasn't even on the strength of Anthony Edwards in a game 7, as we know, because he shot terribly. He was 6 for 24, but he made a lot of key plays and big moments, especially in the second half. But it's not as if they have that offensive team that will be a Batman to Robin scenario when we look at the Mavericks, or a team that has 2 solid guys or 1 good guy and a solid and maybe a third. You don't see that. And Mike Conley Jr., he's been another one that hasn't. And not to say that you expect a lot out of Mike Conley Jr., even as a 17-year veteran in the league, but the Timberwolves can't seem to find their way, especially in big moments. And we saw Edwards throw the pass away in game number 2, which set up the heroics for Luka Doncic. And everything that the Timberwolves are not doing is what the Dallas Mavericks are. And that's what this series boils down to at this point. And when you have Kyrie and Luka scoring 33 points as they did yesterday and shot 8 for 10 between the both of them in the fourth quarter and just making big shots and coming up clutch, ice water in the veins, the T-Wolves have no answer for what the Mavericks have done here throughout the first 3 games of the series. And now you have to wonder whether or not they're going to come out of this series alive. Their confidence, I'm sure, even though Anthony Edwards in the postgame says that, hey, we're going to come back here tomorrow. We're not shaking. Yeah, we may be down 0-3, but the series isn't over. And of course he's going to say those things. He's not going to come out and say, oh, I don't know if we're going to win tomorrow night or on Tuesday night. I don't know what we have left, blah, blah, blah. But this has just been complete domination in the fourth quarter and in big moments. And even when you look at game 2, where the T-Wolves had an 18-point lead in the second quarter, and we understand big leads in the NBA, you might as well just throw them out the window. Unless you have a 50-point lead where we haven't seen the team come back from that deficit. But remember, the Mavericks early in the postseason were down 31 against the Clippers, came all the way back to take a lead. Now, granted, they did lose. That was in a game 4. But it just goes to show you that no lead is safe. Whether you're up by 5 with 30 seconds to go, up by 12 with 6 minutes to go, or up by 30 and it's at the half. That's how the NBA is. Any team can get back in it as long as you have some top guns and good shooting, because the 3 is what's going to bring a lot of these teams back. And we all know that the runs in the NBA, they're always going to come at some point. And as you saw there down the stretch, what do they have? A 13-1 run for Dallas to close out the game last night. And that's all you need to know about what's happening in the first part of this series. And do I think Minnesota's going to come out alive tonight? Or tomorrow night, excuse me? I don't think so. Why would I think it's going to be any different? What, all of a sudden Kyrie and Luka, they're going to go ice cold in the fourth quarter? Or one of those 2 guys is going to go cold? Because even if either one happen to not shoot well, you know that maybe the other is going to carry them on their shoulders and deliver them to an NBA Finals appearance. And that's the beauty about having those 2 guys on your team. It's not as if you just have to rely on the one guy, or if you know that the one guy's off, the other one can pick up the slack. And when you have that luxury that the Mavericks do, then you're pitching with aces here, if you want to talk about it from a card stakes perspective. So that's what we have there with the Mavericks and the T-Wolves. It's going to be interesting to see how the T-Wolves respond to this. They're going to have to come out flying, and they're going to have to just put complete pressure throughout, because even if they have a 20-point lead with 6 minutes to go, you know that there's going to be snakes in their head wondering if they're going to be able to close it out, knowing that the Mavericks will probably have a run in them. And then we have to wait to see what's going to happen with Derek Lively, as he got a knee to the head from Karl Anthony Towns. So who knows what his status will be. And we know Lively's been fantastic throughout the course of this postseason. So we'll have to wait and see on that. And as far as the other series with the Celtics and Pacers, now the Celtics backed up game 1 with that miraculous 3-point shot by Jaylen Brown. And the Celtics, as we all know, had no business winning that game. A lot of just terrible inbounds passes and balls that went out of bounds. A lot of mistakes there by the Pacers late in game 1, which led to that victory. And then game 2, they backed it up with a very good performance. 40 points for Jaylen Brown, and then Tatum, who did not get off to a good start in game 2, but certainly played well in the third quarter. And it went going away. They led by as many as 20. They won by 16. And then you wondered what was going to happen with Tyrese Halliburton as he hurt his hamstring, which was the same hamstring he hurt back in January. I believe he was out 18 games because of it. And with him leaving, certainly left a void for the Pacers, and maybe that was just a psychological advantage for the Celtics and a disadvantage for Indiana, because throughout that second half, they did not play well. And now it led them to game 3 there on Saturday night without Haliburton. And they played very well. They had contributions from everybody. Andrew Nembhard, who had a career high, 30 points in the game. TJ McConnell, who the guy's like a water bug. He's a pest, but he is as pesky and has a ton of heart and guts as you would ever want to have in an NBA player. That's a guy who could play on my team any day. And yes, I'm sure that he's a guy that could get exposed and not put up big points. And not that he's expected to do so, but when you don't expect it and he has those type of performances, and we saw that there even in the first 2 games against Boston, more so game 1 than 2, and we saw what he did against the Knicks in that series. But even with his contribution, I believe he had 23 points. Miles Turner, of course, made a bunch of threes, and that still wasn't enough, because what you saw there on Saturday night was the Celtics' grit, was their resolve, which we haven't really seen here throughout this Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum run. Yes, we've seen them win some close games when they absolutely had to have, whether it was the 2 Game 6s in Milwaukee 2 years ago and in Philadelphia last year. But in crunch time, usually the Celtics, they're the ones that are fumbling the ball out of bounds or coughing up the ball or ill-timed passes, etc. But for what happened there Saturday, with them coming back, they were down by 18 in the third quarter. They chipped away. Jason Tatum, 36 points, 10 rebounds, 8 assists, 0 turnovers. Great performance by him, as a lot of people thought if he was going to get his sea legs, considering he has not had a very consistent postseason, and he certainly picked up the slack for one Jaylen Brown. I mentioned Al Horford a little while ago, what he did, 7 threes for him, which was his personal record, and scored 23 points, made big baskets. And then you had Drew Holiday, who had the biggest basket of all, getting the and one with the, at late in the game, where the Celtics, I believe at that time it was 114-112, and he had the foul and the free throw to make it 115-104, and then he strips Andrew Nembhard, who came across half court, and I thought maybe he was trying to push the envelope a little bit. They still had time on the clock. They wanted to burn as much time I thought as possible, but I guess he saw a lane to try to attack, and then what happened? He went into a roadblock by the name of Drew Holiday, and then he was able to pick his pocket, go the other way, got fouled, made the 2 free throws, and then the Celtics were able to hang on, and as good of a win as you could possibly have if you're the Celtics, especially this late in the year, because even though they've been undermanned, the Pacers that is, and not having their top guard there and Haliburton, but just knowing that they were able to gut out this type of game, and we haven't seen the Celtics have a game like this in quite some time, and really throughout the course of this year, as they always seem to blow out their opponents or have these big 20-point leads, as you've seen the graphic all year long. And now let's see if they get to close them out tonight. Something tells me tonight, not to say that they'll take the pedal off the metal, but if you ask me which one of the 2 teams are going to lose here, whether it's Boston or Dallas, to maybe extend the series to a 5th game, I can see the Celtics losing. But something tells me I would think that the Celtics are just going to want to put this series to rest. And that's with Haliburton, if he does come back or not. But something in my gut does tell me I could see Indiana showing some pride, showing a little toughness, and winning a game. Now, if Boston comes out of the gate flying, and even though I don't trust them with a big lead, if by any stretch the Celtics are just red hot from the 3, they're getting contributions from the usual suspects, but maybe from Peyton Pritchard, or if Horford's going off again, knowing that they could just smell another chance to get to a final, I think they're going to win the game. But if Indiana comes out of the gate flying and the Celtics start to come back and maybe they make it close, but Indiana just continues to just put more pressure and make shots as we've seen them do throughout this postseason, then something tells me I think that this is going to be a 5th game come Wednesday night in Boston. But other than that, past 5, I don't see it. Because if the Celtics do happen to go back to Boston up 3-1, there's no way that I see them losing a game 5 in their building. And that's coming from me, where they've lost a ton of postseason games here over the last 3-4 years, and I could go through the whole laundry list, and I've done so in the past. But I think the Celtics, I think they'll find a way to win tonight. Although, I don't know, something tells me maybe Indiana will, but I don't know, maybe Indiana, because of the way they lost game 1 and now losing game 3, who knows what they're going to have left here going into game 4 tonight, where the Celtics, I think, are going to be riding high and knowing that they probably want to have 10 days off after winning tonight to get to an NBA final. I think the Celtics will prevail. But I think if you ask me, either Boston or Dallas, which one will lose and go to a 5th game, I would say Boston, not only because they're on the road, But Dallas, them being at home, obviously is going to be huge and wanting to close out the Timberwolves at home. But I can see the Celtics not necessarily taking the foot off the gas, but kind of just going with the flow of the game. And if it gets out of control, then they'll just say, we'll see you in Boston on Wednesday, where they'll hopefully close out the Pacers at that time. So that's what you have there with the two series as we look forward to tonight. Other NBA news, I know the Cavaliers fired JB Bickerstaff, which I was completely surprised by. And I know he could puzzle you with some of his coaching decisions and things of that nature. But considering they won a round, all right, granted it was against the Orlando Magic, a young team trying to find their way in the league. And then going into the conference semis where they didn't have Donovan Mitchell for the last 2 games, or maybe even 3 games that I think of off the top of my head. And then not having Jared Allen, and their team was pretty much a mash unit. And for them to fire Bickerstaff, unless they have somebody else that is going to be a guy that's going to take them to the promised land, I don't know. I'm sure it's going to be a young guy that's coming up in the ranks, maybe in-house or outside, who knows. But I was really surprised by that. And I'm not trying to make JB Bickerstaff out to be Pat Riley, but still very surprised to see that. And where they're going to find a guy that's similar to him or even better, unless they're going to pluck a Will Hardy like the Utah Jazz did from the Boston Celtics a few years ago, unless they have a guy like that in mind that's going to be a part of this franchise for 5, 6, 7 years, then they know obviously a lot better than I do, but still just very shocking to see them cut bait, especially after what they did. I can see if they lost in the first round to Orlando and maybe you want to change, and you did go up against the Celtics. So that's what I got there with the NBA. Now let me put on my skates and get to what's happening on the ice in the NHL. And just like I mentioned, this Panther-Ranger series, I think it's just getting warmed up. Now, we talked about what happened Game 1 there on Thursday. Game 2, nip and tuck, back and forth, went into overtime where Barclay Goodrow got the overtime goal. And Sergei Bobrovsky, who was fantastic in the game, played very well. Same for Igor Shesterkin for that matter. But a lot of the physicality, a lot of the back and forth wasn't as wide open as you saw just based on the final score there, 2-1. But Barclay Goodrow, maybe a little bit of a screen, went top shelf on the glove side of Bobrovsky. So the Rangers were able to get that split. And then yesterday afternoon, which I didn't like, why couldn't that be a night game? Quick turnaround, but you would think that would have benefited the Panthers considering they had the home ice here yesterday. And of course, we'll have the home ice there tomorrow night. But the Rangers came out flying. Really, the Panthers did from the start because that first period was just crazy. 2-2 after 1. Rangers get 2 more goals there in the second period. And you have to give it up. Alexis Lafreniere, he's starting to grow up right in front of our eyes. I've gotten on him in the past. A guy who was a former #1 overall, much ballyhooed coming out of junior. And I get it. Not everybody can be Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid, or even Mario Lemieux if you want to go all the way back. But he was a guy that a lot of people thought was going to be maybe not the face of the NHL down the road, but certainly one of the top handful of stars. And slowly but surely, he's coming out of that to show that he's a guy that could maybe be one day, dare I say, an MVP type of player. 2 goals there yesterday, and beautiful goals at that. Top shelf on a backhand, and then skating through the defense to get the second goal for Lafreniere. And then on top of that, you had Barclay Goodrow who had 2 more goals to where I believe Sean McDonough was calling him Gordie Howe, as he's had this renaissance here, not only with the overtime goals it's just talked about, but 2 goals there yesterday. And then the Panthers were on a complete onslaught in that third period, getting a power play goal, then getting the equalizer there just a couple of minutes after that. And they had added so much pressure on Shesterkin, pounding him with shots. So many times they attacked the net, and Shesterkin held his own to where the game went into overtime again. And then what happened? Alex Wenberg, who they got from Winnipeg midseason and had not even scored a goal, and I understand he'd been out of the lineup as well, but got the deflection there up high in the overtime to where the Rangers were able to get home ice back. And now with them winning 5-4, the Panthers, not to say that they're reeling or on their heels, but now have to get back in the series because although we've seen them come back from 3-1, as they did to the Bruins last year, and I understand that's last year, not this year, but I would think they want to get back to Madison Square Garden tied at 2. I don't think they want to put themselves in a big hole. That was a game that they could have won yesterday. I'm not going to say they should have won. And even with that third period, that was just, I tell you, for the Ranger fan, they must have been sick to their stomach because there was just shot after shot after shot and so many opportunities there, hitting crossbars and posts, and just the unbelievable play by the Panthers, but they fall short. And I'm sure the Panthers, they're going to come out relentless there in Game 4. And I would not be surprised if it gets back to the Garden at 2. And that's why I think that series is going to be a lot more compelling and fascinating. Whereas in the other series with Edmonton and Dallas, now the Oilers got off to a good start winning Game 1. They got off to a 2-0 lead. Tyler Seguin scored a goal in the second period and then got the game-tying goal with about 3.5 minutes to go in the third period. And then in the overtime where you had Connor McDavid, of course, the perennial MVP candidate, had to go to the penalty box for a 4-minute high sticking penalty where it drew blood, and you thought right then and there that the Oilers were going to be doomed, but the Stars were unable to capitalize. Then later on in the period, Connor McDavid had a golden opportunity to ice the game, but Jake Ottinger had a miraculous save on McDavid. But then early in the second overtime, McDavid gets the game winner, and Edmonton steals game one, and put themselves in a driver's seat to maybe go up 2-0, going back to Edmonton, but that wasn't the case, although it was 1-1, and that was a game that was back and forth, tooth and nail. But in the third period, Mason Marchment gets the go-ahead goal there early in the third, and then they tack on an empty netter there with about 3 minutes to go, or less than that, about 2.5 minutes to go in the third. So the Stars get the series evened as the scene shifts to Edmonton for the next 2 games. How this series is going to go, I said Dallas was going to win in 6. I could see Dallas winning the next 2 games. Edmonton they're one of those teams that are unpredictable. Can't really trust. Yes, they could score with the best of them. But who knows? If they're going to put forth the effort that they did, as we saw in Game 2, not be sluggish out of the gate as we've seen in these game 1s in this postseason, whether it was against Vegas, Colorado, and even Edmonton for that matter. So for me, I would think that Edmonton will get one of these next 2 just based on my prediction. But I would not be surprised if Dallas wins the next 2. They've been very good on the road, as we've seen. The only road loss they had was that Game 6 against Vegas in the opening round. Remember, they won the 2 games in Vegas, the 2 games in Colorado. So for the Stars, right now you would think they have the Oilers right where they want them. But Edmonton, hopefully they could get a 2-1 series lead just to add some pressure. And not only that, also to some suspense in this series, because you don't want Dallas to go up 2-1 where now all the pressure is going to be on Edmonton. And then Dallas, they could play their style. And you would think that the Oilers would force the play a little bit to where that's going to expose them to some mistakes and maybe some odd man rushes. So I think Dallas, they're still in good shape, even though they did lose Game 1. But Edmonton, to me, they have to win tonight, I think, if they have any shot to win this series. And that's not to say that even if they lose tonight and win Game number 4, yes, they'd still be in the series. But then that means they have to win at least one more game on the road in Dallas, which they already have done. But that's asking a lot once you get deep into a series like this. So let's see what's going to happen there. I think Edmonton will win one of the next 2. Am I confident in that prediction? I can't say I am. But you know what? Wishful thinking is going to have them win one of these games. Maybe they win a 4-2 type game where they get out to a 3-0 lead. And then, of course, the Stars come back and then they survive there with an empty netter late. I could see that. So we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen there in that series. But that's what you have there with the NHL. As we move it along, any news and notes in the National Hockey League? I think you do have a coaching hire, which I was a little bit puzzled by. Now, I talked about last week how the Toronto, and this is not what I'm puzzled by any means. The Maple Leafs, they fired Sheldon Keefe, that you did know of, and they hired Craig Berube, longtime NHL tough guy, even played for the Maple Leafs there throughout the course of his long career. They hired him, which I thought was an excellent hire. They need some toughness. They need a guy who's won a Stanley Cup with the Blues in 2019. So I thought that was an excellent hire. But Sheldon Keefe, the guy who they fired, for whatever the reason, the Devils must have loved him, and they said, hey, we want you to come on board. They hired him as the head coach of the Devils. Now, that's not a knock on Sheldon Keefe, because I understand if you're going to be the coach of one of the esteemed franchises in the National Hockey League, and of course have not gotten to the mountaintop there and winning a Stanley Cup in 57 years, and you could probably have Toe Blake, that's more Canadians, you could bring out any coach of the past, Punch Imlach, you could, whomever it may be, dig up Scotty Bowman, doesn't matter, even if they were to helm this hockey team, who knows if they're going to be the ones that's going to take them to the Holy Grail. So for that, how I look at it is that for Sheldon Keefe now to be on the Devils, okay, but does that make the Devil fan any happier or bring them any promise to think that, all right, well, hey, he did do well in the regular season. But what did he do? Win one playoff series in his 5 years as coach of the Maple Leafs? All right, not everybody could be Al Arbor or Scotty Bowman or Glenn Sather. I get it, but I guess when you go into the scrap heap and you see Sheldon Keefe, all right, I guess he's the only guy that we could choose. Let's go that route. So that's what you have there with the NHL as we move it along. Now, let me lace up my cleats, get in the batter's box, and talk some baseball. And there's going to be a rant coming, people, a Reels rant. So stay tuned for that, especially as we get to this segment. Now, I'm going to start off with this because we're at Memorial Day, which is usually the one barometer that we get to in the regular season, because now we've played just about 2 months, considering it's May 27th and the season started on March 28th. And you have a good idea as to which teams are probably going to be the contenders and even the teams that may be pretenders. And there's a lot of teams that are already out, which I'm going to cross out right away. And this is the bad thing where baseball, they could be looking at a long, hot, and even boring summer. Because, and I could go through it right now, you already know which teams are not going to make it. And I'm talking about playoffs. Forget about wild card, division, please. We're looking at teams that you could already say bye-bye to. And this is off the top of my head. Marlins, Rockies, White Sox, those three for sure, gone. They're already planning for 2025. The Oakland A's, you could already say bye-bye to. And even though they played well and been competitive, but nobody's expecting them to be of any threat to the wild card. I don't care if they're 5 back and it's July 31st. And we all know, we would think by then they're not going to be 5 back. So we could certainly pump the brakes on that. But you can forget about them. You can forget about I'll say this, the Nationals. I don't know about the Blue Jays. Maybe they'll still be in the running. That we'll have to wait and see. I would even think the LA Angels, they're going to be long gone as well. Now, it's funny because I talked about Houston in the past, and I don't trust them 100% as we know because of this reason. They haven't been able to get the season on track. And yes, I could talk about the track record that they've had. And yes, there should be some trust in them, but there's no Dusty Baker as the manager. You have Joe Espada, and I understand he is highly esteemed throughout the sport. But again, this is his first go around as a manager, and how he's going to handle this and how he's handled his team so far hasn't been what we would expect from an Astro team considering what they've done here over the last half dozen years. And of course, my internet connection is slow here. So if you're watching on YouTube, you see me looking down on my laptop, waiting for the standings to come up. I want to get a better grasp and view of what I'm talking about here. But with these teams, the sad part is that a lot of these teams are going to be out of the mix. There's no way that you're going to be looking at these teams as part of a wild card or even division mix. And, oh, geez, wow. Oh, my goodness. Well, I got to interrupt here because I'm just seeing some breaking news. Wow. As I'm refreshing my page here, and some breaking news earlier with Rafael Nadal, which I was going to get to as he was in the French Open. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But as I'm refreshing the page and I talked about my internet connection going slow, I'm reading here that Bill Walton, Hall of Famer, as we all know, UCLA, arguably the second best college basketball player in the history of the sport. And Portland Trailblazers, as we know, won a championship there in the 76-77 season against the Philadelphia 76ers. Came back later, 86 Celtics, was a member on that team as a role player. And reading that he just died of cancer. 71 years of age. Wow. And Walton, if he was healthy, if it wasn't for those foot injuries that he had, especially the year after they won the title, where I believe they started off, they were 52-10. And I remember as a boy getting into Sports Illustrated with him, he having the long hair and with his leg in a cast and with the crutches, and how the Portland Trailblazers, who probably would have gone back-to-back that year, how their season was just imploded right after his injury, and pretty much from that point on was never the same player. And Walton, I would have thought, or I would think I should say, would have been a top 50 player. He may have been a top 50 player NBA all time, but he certainly, with the injuries, did not have the career that a lot of people thought he would have had. And sadly, unfortunately, sports is cruel in that way. So, wow, just reading here, died of cancer, 71. And I know he was doing a lot of these games for the Pac-12 and college basketball. I know Adam Silver just released a statement. Yeah, joined ESPN in 2002. That's way back. And yeah, just sad. Sad story. Thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Walton family, the NBA. Of course, his son Luke, who played in the NBA and coached for the Lakers, as we all know. Wow, just a shock there just to see that pop up on my screen as I'm talking baseball. And one more time, Bill Walton, the NBA great Hall of Famer, died of cancer at the age of 71. Now, we're going back to baseball because that's what we were discussing here. And as I see here, they already canceled the Met game as rain is going to come through the Northeast here this afternoon where the Dodgers are coming to town. I'll get to the Mets in a little bit, but since I'm on the baseball theme, when we talked about the teams that are already the pretenders or are not going to be a part of the postseason, and there are a lot of teams that are going to be in the middle. I guess you could say I already flushed out the teams that are not going to be a part of this. And I don't know what's happening here. Now as I'm clicking the MLB standings, the one tab I'm trying to get to is not coming up here. So let's just cut right to it. The 5 teams that I know are going to be in the running for a World Series and winning the whole thing. And this is where it's going to get boring for baseball. You're going to have Baltimore, the Yankees, Philadelphia, Atlanta, although they suffered a huge blow yesterday, and then the Dodgers. Those are going to be your 5 front-running teams in baseball. Now, the other teams that are going to be hanging around or may be a threat, whether your name are the Seattle Mariners, the Texas Rangers, I understand defending champ, and you're going to get DeGrom and Scherzer back, so that's going to add big time to see whether or not you could defend your World Series championship of last year, but they are not a guarantee with those other 5 teams that I think could not only get to, but also win a World Series. You're also looking at a team like the Cubs. Do I believe in them to get to a World Series? Absolutely not. Or even the Brewers, for that matter, who, to me, they've played above their heads, but I'm not looking at them as a threat. The Diamondbacks, we could talk about them having a subpar year, and even though making it to a World Series, do I have any faith that they're going to get back to a World Series? Absolutely not. I'm certainly not looking at the Red Sox, the Rays, who can't seem to get out of their own way, Toronto, anybody in the AL Central. I'm not including Cleveland, despite how great they've played. I'm certainly not including the Royals, even though they've gotten off to a tremendous start to their season. I'm not including a team like the Padres. Forget about the Giants. So when you put all those teams that are in the middle, I don't think they are going to be anywhere near a championship series or World Series. To me, it's going to be those top 5 teams. And as it was back in the baseball preview, I predicted Baltimore and Philadelphia as your World Series. So, for what that's worth. So, baseball, unless there's going to be a drastic shift or a change to where teams are going to wake up and finally make a run or finally do something where a lot of people didn't expect, a la the 19 Washington Nationals who were 19-31 and they came all the way back to win a World Series. I don't see that. And I understand that's the beauty of sports. You can't forecast that. But in all seriousness, baseball is so top-heavy right now that to me, it's going to be any one of those 5 teams winning the World Series because the Seattles, even the Texases, the Cubs, Brewers, Red Sox, Blue Jays, Rays, going down the list. Those teams, to me, I don't see them getting to or even winning a World Series. That's all there is to it. And the Braves suffered a huge blow there yesterday. Ronald Acuna Jr., who was trying to attempt to steal in the first inning of a game against the Pirates, how he tried to get back to the bag and he just crumpled to the turf, got tagged out. He left the game with knee soreness, but then it was determined that he had torn his ACL. That was his left one because remember, he tore his right one in 2021 in the warning track in Marlins Park there. And if you want to look at this as an omen, though, Braves fans, when he tore his ACL in 2021 and him being a key part of that team and that offense, etc., what did the Braves do that year? They won a World Series. So if you think that maybe little Ewing theory a la Bill Simmons, without having Ronald Acuna Jr., does that mean that you're going to possibly have a chance to get to a World Series and win? Well, obviously we still have 4 more months of baseball to get through, but if you want to hang your head on that, do so, because stranger things have happened, and watch the Braves be one of the final 2 teams representing in the Fall Classic when we get to October. So we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen as the Braves. I'm sure they're probably going to maybe get a guy, not necessarily off the scrap heap, but maybe a rental that they could bring in to fill in for Acuna, unless they're going to bring up somebody from AAA. So that we'll have to see what's going to happen there with the Braves as they fill a big void there out in right field. But for baseball overall, that's what you have there. And I know the weekend was kind of crazy when we looked at what happened with the call on Thursday with the White Sox and Orioles, how the umpire automatically called the game over based on the infield fly rule on a pop-up there where I believe Andrew Vaughn was on second base and Gunnar Henderson went to make the play, but because Vaughn was in the vicinity, which was crazy, of Henderson, deemed interference, which would have been a double play, but with the infield fly rule, the batter's automatically out. Why would Vaughn, who did not see Henderson at the time when the ball was popped up in the air, but they ended the game like that, which, could you imagine if that was a postseason game? That would have been just, everybody would have been in an uproar, and that would probably still be a story 3 days later. But that was the scenario with the White Sox going nowhere, as we know, and of course the Orioles at the top of the AL East, or near the top, with them fighting it out with the Yankees. You had that going on. And speaking of the Yankees, 2 out of 3 in San Diego over the weekend, where Aaron Judge continues his torrid stretch. They also got the back 2 games against Seattle. So they had won 4 in a row before losing yesterday 5-2. And the Yankees, what could you say? Juan Soto, in his first time back to San Diego, hits a home run. Stanton also hits a homer. Yankees avoided, or actually could have had 2 shutouts, because they shut out the Padres 8-0 on Friday, and then they won 4-1, where they gave up a home run to Fernando Tatis Jr. in the 9th, and then they did lose yesterday 5-2, so now they go to Anaheim, which I'm sure they're going to feast on their angel pitching before going up the coast over the weekend to San Francisco. So the Yankees flying high, as we know. And Garrett Cole expects to return next month, as he's been throwing off a mound. He's feeling good. We don't know what timetable, is it going to be early June, mid-June, late June? So I'm sure with the start that the Yankees have had and the rotation, who has been well above anybody's expectations, whether it's Marcus Stroman pitching well, obviously Luis Hill, Clark Schmidt has been pretty good. I believe he lost the game yesterday, but Schmidt has been fine. And even Nestor Cortez has pitched well as of late, although he has not pitched well all year. So the Yankees are doing it well with their pitching staff. And I would think if you're Brian Cashman, Aaron Boone, etc., even though Cole's going to come back when he says so, but there is absolutely zero rush. So if that means early June, mid-June, or late June, whenever he comes back, that's when he comes back. And that's how I would look at it if you're a Yankee fan. And then you also had the Padres, their, I believe it's the center fielder, Jung-Hoo Lee, who they got from Korea. And I said Padres, I'm talking about the Giants. I got my teams all mixed up, my West Coast teams. And the only reason why I bring him up, you're not going to see him throughout the rest of the year, as he will need shoulder surgery, the import from Korea that they got at the beginning of the offseason before they started putting together their roster, whether it was Blake Snell or even Jorge Soler at the end. So for the Giants, they're going to be without him for the rest of the year. So for the few Giant fans, they're going to have to deal with that. Let's see what else I have here. Oh, should I just get right to it, people? I guess I will have to unpack this now. I wanted to save this until I really feel that this team is going to be out to sea. And to me, they're already out to sea. And I did not mention them when I talked about the pretenders and the teams that were in the middle trying to see if they could get themselves into the wild card fray. But I have to say, this New York Met team of 2024, they are already 6 feet in, and you could start throwing dirt on them, although they could still get out. It's not as if they're immersed in 3 or even 4 feet worth of dirt. But I have to say, this team, they're unwatchable. It is just a flat-out disaster how this team has been comprised this year, how they've turned the tables, and I understand why the owner, Steve Cohen, did so. He thought that by getting the big contracts to Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer, and even with the success of 2022, which might as well seem like 22 years ago, them winning 101 games, and not to go down that road, and here we are at Memorial Day, and 2 years ago at this time on Memorial Day where they had a 10.5 game lead against the Braves, that might as well seem like an eternity ago. But for Cohen to now pivot to go this route, and what we've seen from this team so far has been an out-and-out disaster. And I don't even want to unpack this is just going to get me aggravated, but I'll try to do this in literally 3 minutes or less. Can I start with Francisco Lindor? He finally got over the Mendoza line. He's been under the Mendoza line for pretty much the first 2 months of the season. And how much is he getting paid per year? And how many more years he has on his contract? That is going to be one of the worst contracts ever. And I know I said that before in the past, and I understand he's put up good numbers as a Met, but when you're getting paid $34 million a year, you got to put up close to MVP numbers. And he plays a very good shortstop, as we know, but his offensive performance and production has been disastrous. That's number one. This Pete Alonso saga, I don't know what's going to happen here. Alonso, he's batting, 230-something. He does put up home runs, but he is a streaky home run hitter, as we know. And the reports had it that they offered him $158 million for 7 years, and we know who his representation is, Scott Boras. We know they laughed at that. Right now, I'm at a point where if they even trade him, and there may be some rumors he goes to Boston, so be it. This is how I feel. And I once thought that, no, you got to keep this guy. He's a homegrown player, etc. But you know what? I'm not willing to give him 8 years. He's going to turn 30 if he's not 30 already. He already may be 30 years old because I believe he was born January of 94. So you think I'm going to give this guy 8 years and 200 some odd million? And you know they're going to ask for the sun, moon, and stars? If that's the case, then you know what? Try to get something for him or just let him walk. Seriously, that's how I feel. I don't need to get into Edwin Diaz. I talked about him a couple weeks ago. Stop with the trumpets. And here it was. He had a couple of performances where he came out in the 7th inning and even in the 8th inning the other day. But then he came in the 9th on Saturday and he spit the bit there. And Edwin Diaz, I don't know. The World Baseball Classic is now brought him back after him hurting himself. He's now back to the 2019-2020 Edwin Diaz because the guy can't get anybody out. And it's just a shame because this was a guy that you thought finally got those yips and got all that out of his system. And now he's back to being the Edwin Diaz that we got from the trade from Seattle back 6-7 years ago. Or now 2018, about 6 years ago. And I'm not going to get into Jeff McNeil either. He's fallen off a cliff with his batting. He's batting, 230? The team's just a mess. That's all there is to it. And they're not going anywhere fast. And mind you, June is usually the month where they collapse. Well, they pushed that up a month earlier. What are they, 6-18 this month? So if this is going to be anything to what we've seen over the last 6-7 years, 2022 notwithstanding, by the time we get to the 4th of July, we could certainly put the Mets left for dead. And that's all I'll say about that. Now let me move it along here. Let's see. Oh, Stephen A. talking about... interesting. Stephen A. talking about Ronald Acuna Jr., baseball. I just see a highlight here. As I don't know what the hell's happening with my ESPN. I'm trying to refresh, and I'm just getting stopped here. I don't know if it's the internet. Who knows? But anyway, I got to move it along here. Now let me get to the French Open. Here's the other big story of the day. So Rafael Nadal, when we talked on Friday, we didn't even know if he was going to participate here. And we get it that over the last year plus, he's had these injuries to his side. We know that he's been a warrior on the court throughout the course of his career. And we figured that the French Open was going to be his domain to come back on, considering he's won 14 Grand Slam or 14 French Opens. He's won 21 or 22 Grand Slams. And we figured that he was going to make an appearance here. And over the weekend, we found out that he was going to come back, obviously unseeded as a wild card. And his first match was going to be against Alexander Zverev. And Zverev, as we all know, is one of the upper echelon, top flight men's tennis players there on the tour. And we knew that that was going to be tough sledding for him coming back after over a year. I don't know exactly what the timetable was. And Nadal, unfortunately, left in straight sets. First time ever, this stage of his career, you can understand why. And who knows, this could be the last time, and I believe it was been intimated by him that this could have been his last appearance at Roland Garros at the French Open, which he has dominated and has been arguably, not even arguably, you can't even debate about it, the best clay court player in the history of the sport. And now you really have to wonder, what's left for Nadal? Does he even attempt to go to Wimbledon or make it a swan song here to go there and then Flushing Meadows for the U.S. Open and then call it a career? Father Time has caught up to him. And I love Nadal. And we know how tough and how much of a warrior, as I mentioned, that he was on the court. But he's not going to be able to overcome all of these maladies, all of these injuries at, 38 years of age? And Zverev beat him in straight sets. What was that? I believe 6-3, 7-6, 6-4. I'll double check that. But in fact, it was 6-3, 7-6, 6-3. Rafa, time has come. There's no shame. And I understand that this is all you've known since you were a boy. But just like Roger Federer had the exit stage left, your time has come. That's all there is to it. And who am I to tell him to quit or to hang up his tennis rackets? Not me. But the writing is on the wall, and we've seen it. And I didn't watch the match. Obviously, I was prepping for... I wanted to at least keep in tune to what was going on, but I didn't watch as I was preparing for the pod. But you have to say, this is it for Rafael Nadal. And whether or not he does play at Wimbledon or even the U.S. Open later on this summer, kudos to him. And listen, who am I to tell him not to do that? But I'm sure he's going to have the same fate that he had here today at the French that he's going to have there in those other two tournaments, unless he skips Wimbledon and then goes to the U.S. Open. Who knows? But Rafa, the big story there as he was ousted in straight sets. And then I didn't even know that Naomi Osaka was coming back to the mix as she won her first French Open, or had her first French Open win since 2021, beating Lucia Bronzetti in straight sets, in 3 sets, 6-1, 4-6, 7-5. So let's see if Osaka's going to have any legs here. If she could get to the end of the week, that would be, to me, a huge plus. Could she get to next week? I don't know. That may be asking a little bit too much, considering she has not been on the tour over the last few years, not only with the mental health issues, but of course she had a baby over the last year or so. And for her to really get back into competitive form and competitive shape to go up against the likes of the Iga Swiatek's, the Coco Gauffs, the Elena Rybakina's, Arina Sabalenka's, that's going to be tough. But we'll see. Hopefully Osaka does have a little bit of a run in her. You know I'll be on top of that. But that's what you have here so far with the tennis as it's just getting underway. But of course, with Rafa being the huge story, and rightfully so, that one, of course, was going to be at the forefront when it comes to the tennis tournament. And if you didn't hear what I had to say about the tournament overall, go back to Thursday's podcast. I go into that. To me, the men's is up for grabs, and the women's, because Swiatek has won back-to-back in 3 of the last 4 French Opens, she is by far the favorite. And you'll get even a more in-depth feeling for that if you go back to Thursday's podcast, which I appreciate if you do, Apple, Spotify, and of course, here on YouTube. And then lastly, you had the Indy 500 yesterday. Well, a couple other things before we wrap up. Indy 500 yesterday, you had some storms delay the start of it. And you had a guy in Josef Newgarden win back-to-back, the first back-to-back Indy 500 winners since Elio Castroneves 22 years ago. So that's a remarkable achievement in its own right. But for Newgarden, there was some controversy surrounding it as there was a cheating scandal regarding his race strategist where he was kept away from the speedway. And I don't know how that gets tied into cheating. Obviously, I'm not a racing aficionado or am really in tune to what's going on there when it comes to whether it's NASCAR, F1, or even the Indy 500 for that matter. So I didn't go in the weeds on that to see why there was some controversy. But for Newgarden to win back-to-back, again, that's a very good achievement, something that hasn't been done in well over 2 decades. So kudos to him. Now, I don't know if this cheating scandal is just something that he could actually have his title revoked from. I don't know. Maybe that's something I'll look into as we lean into Thursday's podcast and get into it more a little bit then. So your Indy 500 is coming on, and even with the delay with the storms, you still had the race in, and I believe it came down to him and that was last year's race with Pato O'Ward, where I believe it came down to the last lap. But for Newgarden, I'm sure he is relishing in the fact that he's won this race back-to-back. And even going back to last year, a lot of people thought that he was the one guy in racing that has not won the big race, that has not been able to get that one that he could certainly put under his belt, similar to the golf player or the golfer who has not won a major, the best golfer to not win a major tournament. Well, now Newgarden did that last year and now has done it back-to-back, so congratulations to him. And sadly, some more sad news to round off the podcast. To go to golf, Grayson Murray, who had been on the tour and actually has 2 tour wins. He did not win a major, but was a 2-time winner of the tour. Passed away over the weekend, but it was because of an apparent suicide. So, and only 30 years of age, just a terrible story as golf has to endure that. This is a week after what we saw there in the PGA, as they're in between major tournaments, and Grayson Murray, who I'm not really too familiar with. And even though those 2 wins, I believe he won in Hawaii a few years back. And again, not major wins under his belt, but just a terrible story to find out that he took his own life. And yes, the mental health, as we talked about just a few minutes ago with Naomi Osaka, thankfully it's not to that degree, but still it impacts people in different ways. And please, people, if you're feeling a certain type of way, get help. Call your family, friends, the people you know you can count on that you know will be there for you, because we need you here. There's no way that despite whatever is going on inside, whether it's in your chest or between your ears, you can't get help. So please do so. Here I am being an advocate, but hey, it wouldn't be my due diligence to tell people out there to, if you're feeling a certain type of way, or someone you know, or someone that you obviously confide in, family member, friend, etc. So for Grayson Murray, thoughts, prayers, and condolences go out to his family. And this is on the heels of the news regarding Bill Walton. So just 2 terrible stories that have come down the pike here in sports as we close out another podcast. So that will do it. Another episode just about in the books. As always, people, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day, out of your holiday. Hopefully you're kicking back. And I know I'm recording this later in the day. Usually I have this up by now. But with the holiday and having a late night, but hopefully as you're commuting home or flying back or even driving back from wherever your destination is, hopefully you got me in tune in between your earbuds or even on your speakers. You know I gratefully appreciate your participation in listening to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review, throw me a few stars, write a review. Apple, Spotify, the website, JAYREELZ.com, the channel, @JAYREELZ. And if you need to hit me up for any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can do so at the following: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just a number. The old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast @gmail.com. You know I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, as I always like to say. Talking sports pretty much since birth, with nothing but passion. I was about to mix passion and fire together. What would that be like? Well, anyway, nothing but passion, fire, fury, energy with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Memorial Day. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.